everybody. Thanks again for joining with us. My name is Kylie Smith, and I'm the training manager for the Center of Excellence. It's lovely to have you all. I'm going to run through a few things, and then I'll turn it over to some folks, and I'll introduce our speakers. But first and foremost, again, if you can see on the screen that we would love for you to turn your camera on if possible. We're going to be talking and discussing some case studies at the end, so it'd be really wonderful to see people's faces if possible. And then also, again, using the chat feature and reactions as well later on. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then I'll be monitoring that as we go along. So this is a joint session between iScore-RC and the COE Clinical Trials Toolkit series. And then also this will be a session that is sponsored by ACRP, as you can see for this session. So please place your full name and email address in the chat box for attendance. If you're an ACRP member, please indicate ACRP beside your name and email address if you'd like those contact hours. We're also offering continuing education credits to attendees, so also indicate CE beside your name and email address if you would like continuing education credits. I'll quickly turn it over to our Center of Excellence Director, Shelley Welch, who's going to introduce our ACRP chapter.
Thank you so much, Kylie. Yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Shelley Welch. I'm the director of the Center of Excellence at the Clinical and Translational Science Institute. Many of you all know me, but in addition to that role, I have the pleasure of being the president for the West Virginia chapter of ACRP, the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, only chapter in the state. I believe Connie Sorello is also on the call as well. She is the vice president. ACRP chapter is a little bit small. We have 25 members. We've had a variety of membership over the years, but actually 25 is pretty high for us. And so if you are interested in joining ACRP, you don't have to be necessarily certified through ACRP, but if you would like to be a member of our chapter, please feel free to reach out to myself or Connie. We're happy to answer any questions you might have. ACRP itself is a national organization that's going actually through a bit of changes right now, but we will still have a local chapter, and happy to have new members if you would like. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Shelley. And again, go ahead and place your name and an email address in the chat as well. If you didn't hear that at the beginning, I know people are still getting admitted, but I'll remind people towards the end. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. Our first is Debbie Lee. Debbie is the training manager for the Clinical Trials Center of Excellence, where she has oversight of the Principal Investigator Academy and training associated with the COE for 5 years. She is in the process of transitioning into a new role with the iScore Resource Center, and she will then be assisting to train study coordinators and all the charter sites, including Puerto Rico. She has over 20 years of experience in the research industry at a contract research organization and at West Virginia Clinical and Translational Science Institute. And her fun fact is that recently she took a pottery class and loved it. So we'll have to see some of the pottery later. And then we also have Annie Orbitz. Annie has worked in quality for over 15 years and has been with CTSI for almost 3 years now. For a fun fact, her favorite place to be is on the beach, mine too. She's visited over a dozen beaches along the Atlantic and Gulf Coast of the United States and the Gulf Coast of Mexico. And of all the beaches she's been to, the Outer Banks of North Carolina has her heart and dreams of being a homeowner there one day. So great. Thank you, guys. And I'll turn it right over to Debbie.
Okay, well, thank you, Kylie. Thank you for Shelley as well. So we will go ahead and get started. So if you didn't know, you don't want to see the pottery. I may not even have picked it up, just throwing that out there. Yeah, it's okay. I tried it. So today we're here not to talk about my lack of pottery skills, but we want to talk about quality control for clinical trial data. So we're going to do this kind of in 2 parts. I'm going to do most of the talking. Then we're going to do some case studies, and then it's your turn to talk. I know you're super excited, I can tell, right? So first thing I just want to do is go over some just definitions. Well, let me take a step back. I just want to say that we are doing this from West Virginia University's perspective in our institutional policies as well. So please know, if something I say today You take it back to, for those that are I-score, take it back to your preceptor. Maybe at your institution, that's not the policy. I just want to put that out there. So, okay. So I do want to go over some definitions, QC principles, which is everybody's favorite, I know, and also case studies as well. So for definitions, this is your turn to help participate as well. So tell me something you would find in ICHG 6, good clinical practice. What's something that's in that large document? And you can either take yourself off mute, there's something in the chat, either way is completely fine. Here's an easy answer, protocol. Yes, thank you. How to correct errors in documentation. Absolutely, absolutely. Anything else in that ICHE 6? Obtaining consent. Yes, very, very, very true. There's also, how how the principal investigator, or the investigator, I should say, their roles. There's also the roles of the sponsor as well. And as we all know, if it's an investigator-initiated clinical trial, then that investigator would be doing both the sponsor and the investigator roles, right? Okay. So with that, there's more in there, please. There's definitely more in there. We just covered just a few things. So quality assurance. Quality assurance is really a snapshot in time. So that is something that happens at a very specific time and will likely not be repeated. So it's more of a snapshot. Your quality team might come over and do maybe an internal audit, and or a quality assurance, but once again, it's just a snapshot in time. Whereas quality control is really an operational technique, right? And activities undertaken within the quality assurance system to verify those requirements. And that QC is that day-to-day check. So what happens, in all research study, it should happen in all research studies, and it's always what's happening. So it's much more of a day-to-day operational for the quality control. So let's talk about some QC principles, right? Typically, data is verified 100% when part of QC review. So what are some things that are being reviewed? Regulations, right? Everyone's favorite. Good clinical practice, principles, compliance. Are you following the protocol? And I know that you're like, well, of course we are, Debbie. Have you ever found where people may not be following the protocol when QC is done? Yes, no names will be dropped during this session whatsoever. But I know when I always had questions, I always went straight back to the protocol, right? Let's go to the protocol. What does the protocol say? So kind of thinking about that. Your standard operating procedures, any policies that you're following that need to be followed as well. Your transcriptions in electronic data capture system, if you have that first, if you put it on a paper case report form, and now you need to transcribe that on, in the system. Is somebody doing a QC? Are you doing your own QC check, right? But guess what? We're human, right? So we could be making errors, so making sure that's double looked at. And then we do all of this to ensure that human subject protection, right? We want to follow the alcoic principle. Data is within a predefined or acceptable range, right? When you're looking at those lab values that you're inputting maybe into an electronic case report form or a paper, are you making sure that they're in an acceptable range? And the other thing, one of the things we want to make sure of is that we have the data and that we're doing, we're making sure we're following our regulations. We also want to make sure that going back to the data for one quick second. I'm just looking at my note here and I realized I missed a very important fact that Annie's going to call me out on. So I'm going to beat her to the punch. One of the things with looking at data is thinking about how are you going to round if, when you're doing surveys and you're doing lab values, how are you going to round that up, right? So, the common rule is if it's, greater than 0.4 or above, it's going to go down. If it's above 0.5, it goes up, right? So thinking about that, so making sure that is being done within. So once again, all that data is being looked at the same way, and not I'm putting in it as 8.2 and someone else is putting in it as 8.3. So making sure that's done. All right. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure I get all my notes because Andy's my gatekeeper here. So. What other things are being verified? Training, right, is adequate for a task. If you may have somebody signed on your delegation of duties log that's had the protocol training, yay. But when you go to look at their CV says that they're currently doing their undergraduate in engineering, but they have no training whatsoever documented to do how to do consenting, right? So thinking about had that adequate training. The task is completed by the authorized person as documented. So where should that be documented? Let's say you're doing an informed consent. Where would you look to make sure that that person is authorized to do that informed consent? That is a question for the class.
The DOA.
The DOA. Thank you so much, Caitlin and Paige. Man, you guys were like quick. You must not be multitasking. I appreciate that. And I understand if you do have to multitask or you're, doing something. So the correct form is being used for the task, right? If I literally went with my mom to a visit, will not name the area. It was not here in Morgantown, I will tell you that. The coordinator came in with a sticky note to get her vitals, like her weight and da-da-da. I went, Nicole, and she goes, I know, Debbie. Debbie, I know what you're going to say. So I was like, that is not the correct form. So once again, because now that's your original document, right? Does it have the patient name? Right? I saw Shelley's eyebrow go up there, right? Yeah, absolutely. Tasks are completed in compliance, right? Once again, we talked about SOPs, we talked about protocols. These documents should be readily available during the review, so making sure you have those for your quality team as well. Because the review of data or QC should be documented on a form itself using a checklist. For example, I'm all about trackers. I don't know, I just like the word tracker. So if you do have a tracker and you're doing that data quality control, on that tracker, it should have what you track, right? What consents you track. Let's just say we're looking at consents. When you looked at those consents, because that's important, right? That patient may have been reconsented, 4 months later for whatever reason. So making sure you do the what, the when, what was the issue, right? So making sure that as well. And then the date that the issue was resolved, right? So maybe when quality was looking at it, the consent it was on the wrong version. So the subject did need to be reconsented. So make sure you have that on there as well. So today's session is really, we're going to talk about informed consent. We're going to talk about eligibility. And that's really where our case studies are looking at as well. And then some good clinical practices. So with informed consent and eligibility, making sure the correct version of the informed consent is used. So, the golden standard usually is you print it right before you need it, right? When a study starts up, do you automatically print 100 copies up front? No, because that's unless you're going to enroll 100 patients that day, I would not do that. So the consent process is documented, right? And you're like, well, yeah, we go through the consent, but you still have to make sure it's documented. The consent and eligibility assessment performed by appropriately authorized and delegated and trained personnel. So making sure all of that is captured as well. Each individual protocol inclusion criteria is valid, and each exclusion criteria doesn't apply by verification in source documents. So once again, looking at both of those, going back to maybe your electronic medical records, double checking that that patient is truly eligible to be in the program. Reconsent performed if it is required. So, always remember, if you find an issue with a completed consent, you can't make corrections on that informed consent, right? That patient would need to be reconsented. Timing, right? What kind of timing? Consent prior to study procedures, eligibility assessment. I literally yesterday went out to the FDA website and looked at warning letters. I know, I'm weird. I just wanted to see what was out there. Literally, warning letter to a physician because a patient had a study procedure and there was the informed consent was signed afterwards. So once again, making sure. Documents are completed according to regulations, right? Your protocol, your consent, including ALCOE principles, and we're going to go over those as well real quick because once again, I think this is probably a slide you've seen before, and if not, then you can definitely learn, or sometimes I like refreshers, right? Is it attributable, right? Identifies who recorded the data and when. So do we ever give out our username and passwords to anybody else? No. Why is that, right? Because when you log in, that identifies you logging in to do that. And behind the scenes, there's those lovely audit trails, right? So making sure that one, you don't give away your username and password. Number two, if you're doing the actual form, that case report form, for example, should have an area for you to sign and date at the bottom to show that you completed that case report form. Legible, all data can easily be read and understood. Once again, not obscuring things, not trying to make a 3 into an 8 or vice versa, things like that. Contemporaneous, entries are recorded in real time, right? We want to make sure that we document, when did that consent happen in our electronic medical records? Was the patient able to ask questions during the consent? So making sure that you're doing that. So it's in real time. Original first record, no transcriptions. I already gave my example of the post-it note. Things are accurate. Data represents observations and facts. So once again, don't, for example, don't test things into compliance because that would that's a strategy and that's, not what you should be doing. So making sure things are accurate because you don't want to investigate out of specific results, right? So you want to actually have the true results. Complete entries are up to date with units. So once again, you're like, well, I got the case report form from Pfizer and they put weight, but they didn't put, if it's kilograms or pounds. I have literally worked with a very naive, pharmaceutical company, and we kind of helped. We went back to them and said, hey, it makes sense to put that on there. Or you might be working with an investigator as well, so making sure. It's available. It can be reviewed at any time. So once again, making sure, do you have it handy? If it's in a database system, can you search it to be able to find what's needed? And also, if it's a paper file, where is it stored at? I'm on the I'm on the ground level of Irma Bird here, but, all my documents are over in the hospital on the 8th floor, right? So, kind of think about that. Consistent, chronologically arranged, assigned, and dated, right? So date is chronological. It has a date and time stamp that it's accepted sequences. When you do things electronically, that should already be done. But when you're doing stuff on paper, even for me, for sign-in sheets, sometimes I don't have access to a printer. And I will write a note, unable to access a printer until this day. This is why this is late being done, right? Once again, putting that note on there to provide that. Things need to be enduring, exist for the entire study period. So making sure that data is available long after it's recorded, right? Decades in some situations. So double making sure that, and even digitally recorded data as well. So once again, what's the robust and tested data backup for that? So in practice, what does this mean? So it's raw data should not be discarded, right? If you sign the consent form and you're like, well, I scanned it in, so I don't need it now, right? No. We are keeping those. Use blue or black ink. And Shelly can probably, so Shelly used to be my supervisor many years ago. And I'm like, I literally have a turquoise pen right in front of me. I like my colors. And I literally said, well, why can't I use this? And they're like, go take I had a pink glitter pen at the time. I know that's shocking. They're like, go take it, write something and try to copy it. Yeah, I didn't copy. So once again, and please know on documents that are regulatory, I only use blue or black. No pencils, right? Erasable pens should not be used. It also includes pens with water soluble ink as well. So multiple pages should be numbered, right? So whatever you have should page 1 of whatever, 1 of 4, because that way I know that there should have been 4 pages, but I only have 3 here, right? Record information directly on the source document promptly. Do not record data on scrap paper or sticky notes. And I'm all about recycling, but not when it comes to our research. Ditto marks as well, and I definitely see this, or arrows, right? You're like, they're asking me to sign, like put my initials here, and I really don't want to do my initials clear down this document. So I'm just going to do an arrow, right? That is not acceptable. The other thing is blank spaces. So if you do have a blank space and maybe it doesn't apply, put NA, put, a line through NA. Just to show that. I literally had an auditor across from me, and I gave him my sign-in sheet for a training I had done. He goes, oh, this is lovely. And I was all excited because I thought he was being nice. And he says to me, he goes, I can just sign right here and show that I was in your training session. I went, point taken. After that, we started putting a line through. I had blank spaces for people to sign, right? So don't be across from the auditor. So what does this mean in practice? And I may have given some, things ahead of time, but keep your signature logs to identify signatures and initials. Predating, postdating, backdated is not permitted. I definitely come across this and making sure that you're not doing that. All entries must be signed and dated by the person actually performing the task. I literally had a nurse one time on a 1572. She hand signed the doctor's signature. She said she had his permission. And I would never have known it because it got sent to me through the mail, which was great. But she then proceeded to initial and date that she's the one that signed the signature. So that's how I caught that. But I wouldn't have known that if she wasn't in the habit probably of initial and dating what she did. So, but making sure that you do that. Not that you sign for the physician. Do not do that. So. Date formats should be consistent within the document. So, if your institution has decided that it's using the universal date format, it should be that way throughout your documents. And if you're not and you're using, 10/04/2024, whatever that looks like, but just being consistent with it. Dates should be written, not typed or electronically pre-printed unless obtained through a validated system. Like I know now, digital signatures are fine with the date, but making sure. And then signatures and initials must be personally dated. And then identify additional printouts with identifiable information. Putting the project number at the top, the subject number, the signature and date of the person who generated it. So let's talk about corrections. Guess what? We're human. We make mistakes. I literally made a mistake on a sign-in sheet. And if you guys have ever seen my sign-in sheet, I may have misspelled your name and I didn't mean to do it intentionally, but I have done it before. So it's how you correct it, right? Once again, I didn't throw the sheet away. I just put one line through, and then just one line through initial and date, at the time that it was made. Sometimes you might need to add a brief statement for the change, for the reason, if it's not clearly evident. So making sure that you think about that. Like, so if this is a standalone document, does somebody understand that what, maybe you originally wrote the weight in as 119 and then you changed it to 250? Well, that's a pretty large difference. Why was that error made? You might want to put a brief comment about that. Whiteout, no whiteout, right? Shouldn't have whiteout, shouldn't have erasers, you shouldn't have correcting pens. So making sure. Okay. Because once again, it's okay to make mistakes, it's how you correct it. Complete documents should be full, documents should be full and also legible. Data entered should be accurate. So that is why my first example there is a nice green smiling face, because it's 187.4 pounds. Avoid missing fields, because what do I know about that missing field? Did I not capture the last part of it? Was it 0? I don't know, and I can't assume that. So making sure that we actually put in to avoid that. And maybe it was an NA, because maybe the scale you went to for whatever reason didn't capture. It only did the whole numbers. Now listen, I might bank on those little ounces at the end sometimes, but once again, either 0 and NAing that just to kind of show that. Date initial changes. Remember I said, I made a mistake. I went through initial and dated. Make sure any changes you have are clear. So my question to you, and some of you probably know this answer, you've seen this slide before. Why do I have a sad face for my last example there?
There's no units.
There is no units. Thank you so much, Savannah, and Paige as well. You guys are quick on the draw. Thank you very much. Okay. So data quality is everyone's responsibility, right? It's not just your quality team. It is everybody's responsibility on the team. All versions of documents should be maintained, right? Documents should be maintained in a location to ensure protection of data throughout the study conduct. They should be locked, they should be bound. Right next to my office and in Michelle's office, there are binders of consents, of lab values, things like that. I should not be able to go over there and pick up a patient's binder, right? So making sure that it's locked. And I want to say making sure that I talk about a physical, but also electronic as well. So if you are using, for example, a SharePoint portal, who has access to that? Is that access removed when that person is no longer at your site or maybe no longer in your department? So making sure that that happens as well. Because auditors will ask to pull those reports. Trust me, they will. If you're using multi-site studies with multi-site studies, originals can be maintained at the satellite location during the study with certified copies provided to the PI. Originals are to be filed with the PI at the study conclusion for record retention, because once again, you want all that information back together and then wherever it's going to be stored. All documents to be kept shall be maintained in long-term storage, once again, with restricted access. And that includes your electronic data as well. So, what does that look like? Does that, will those boxes be? Because I don't know about your sites, but I'll say something about our site here. When we went to, meaning Shelley Welch and the team, went to renovate our office, we put shelving on top of shelving because we ran, it's all legal, but they go clear up to the ceiling because we ran out of space. So what does that long-term storage? And usually in your budget, you're going to have that as a line item in your budget. Does it go off site? Things like that. So it's important to QC promptly to correct issues, right, if possible, because you want to prevent future issues. So what do you do when an issue is found? One, you want to correct the issue promptly, right? Prior to that proceeding, you want to communicate the issue to appropriate personnel for correction. And trust me, I understand, it's not the easiest thing to go to someone and say, hey, I just did four informed consents and I accidentally have the wrong version. Once again, making sure you promptly report that and figure out what needs to be done. Because the other thing, you want to prevent the issue from reoccurring, right, on the trial or other trials. Because once again, you learn from every trial that you're on, and you want to take that knowledge that you have, on to that next trial, or learn from other people, things like that. Because you want to enter the deviation, if applicable, to follow up can be performed as needed. And you also need to escalate the issue if there's a systematic error as well. Was the form used, doesn't reflect the current protocol requirements, things like that. Okay, guess what time it is? Debbie's no longer going to talk. Well, wait, I probably need to give you instructions first, Doug. So Kylie has also, so I'm going to explain how we're going to do this because it's a little different because we're on Zoom, right? Question, can you enter data directly to the EDC with no source document? Oh, Shelly's asking a question first. Is that question to me? Is that question is it to me or to the audience?
It's to whoever wants to answer it. I mean, you were talking about source data not too long ago. Sorry, I didn't get the question in a timely manner. And I just wanted to, I thought maybe it might be a good discussion point.
Good. All right, who has the answer? Or what you think might be the right answer?
I think the answer is it depends.
Good answer, Kim.
It does depend.
Yeah.
Depends on what the source is. It is a survey.
Subject, completing the data and putting it directly into the EDC, and the protocol would state that the subject is the one that would enter that data.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what about like vital signs right into EDC?
No.
Yeah, Shelly has those hard questions.
I think it could be if you're using electronic data capture.
I would say you need something that you can actually verify. If you're to be audited, they want to know where that information came from. So if you don't have a papers, trail somewhere, they can't verify the information.
I agree.
Is there regulation about it? I'm testing you guys. I'm testing you. There is. I don't know the specific information about it, but I mean it's a good. I bring the question up to get you thinking about how you practice in your clinical trials. That's all. There is regulation about what can be source document and what can be entered into the EDC. So directly. So just encourage people to look for the answer specifically.
Just for the record, that wasn't part of the case study, but
No,
hopefully mine's a little easier now.
leave it to me to bring put a little wrench in your presentation.
But no, I figured either something has occurred that we want to make sure we go over that. Yeah, it makes sense. So how we're going to do this, Kylie is actually going to, for our first case study, Kylie is going to drop into the chat for us right now. She is going to drop. So we have two different patients. You're going to get their consent forms, their eligibility documents for subjects 1 and 2. And then we also provided a protocol, just an excerpt from the protocol with where it goes over the inclusion and exclusion criteria, because we thought that was important. An authorization log and a training log. I'm going to be quiet because that's some information for you to work through. And if you want to go into the breakout room, you're more than welcome to do that. If you maybe just want to go into a breakout room and kind of talk that out. Annie and I literally just kind of re-talked through everything right before we started, so I get that. But what you're looking for are things that we just went over, right? Looking, what's the date at the bottom of the informed consent, things like that. So once again, you should, the colleagues drop those documents in. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to ask you to do one thing for me because I can't see everybody. Once you are done with this one exercise, if you could just give me like a thumbs up on your Zoom. I just want to see majority-wise people that are done, that have found some issues. And we're going to look at issues with the eligibility and the informed consent, and then maybe anything else you found as well. Okay. Does that make sense? I think it does, but I helped write it, so that may not be helpful. Okay.
So just to confirm, we are looking for things that need to be quality checked.
Correct. Yes. Yes.
So find the mistakes.
Yes, I've made you all quality experts right now. So that's what you're going to do. Yes, good questions.
Okie
you.
dokie, Smokey.
Okay, thank you. Are at 2:50. So now please know you might still be working, and I completely get that. But we are going to go ahead and move forward just because of time. So I would like to focus, the first thing is, what issues did you find with the informed consent? What kind of issue? I mean, did you find any issues?
Yeah, Clark Kent's not on the DOA.
Absolutely. Yes, he is absolutely not on the DOA.
There's a few dates missing.
Yeah, I mean, Caitlin, you're welcome to go ahead and give us.
Just saying there was a date missing.
Oh, a date missing. I apologize. Yes.
How dare you?
Yes, absolutely. What else do we?
Are we looking at just number 1 or number 1 and number 2?
Number 1 and number 2. Yep.
I mean, I can go down a list, but I'll give other people a chance.
Okay. Well, why don't you give, Savannah, why don't you give us one thing you found, if you don't mind?
Well, I'm the one who told you about Clark Kent.
Oh, okay. Oh, I apologize. Okay. All right. We'll let somebody else, because there is should be a glaring issue you may have found.
Patient 2 is not old enough.
Absolutely, yes. Patient 2, they are under the age of 18. Absolutely. Is there anything with the version of the informed consent? Yes, in time and handout 1. Yes, on one of the bottom pages, it's on the page 5 of the informed consent. Absolutely. Thank you, Francis. She, what's her name? Virginia West did not put the time in. Absolutely. Good. Okay, so I'm gonna move my slide so you can kind of see what. Once again, you might find more things as we're speaking, and I'm still sharing my slide. So, some issues. The incorrect version of the consent was used for subject number 1, because the date, the approved date for patient number 1, which was Virginia, the approved date was February 1st of 2017. And if you look at the consent date for patient number 2, it was October 1st of 2017. So once again, the wrong version of that. And once again, you're looking at these electronically, and you can see I have pages printed in front of me because I'm a paper person and you might be a paper person too. So, And then we found, Savannah was kind enough to tell us about Clark Kent, who was not authorized for that activity. It was also not documented that he was even trained on the protocol either. So, and then also the last page has no date with the initial and no time indicated for the consenter as well. So that was also missing as well. Good. Well, okay. Corrective action subjects should not be enrolled, right? Until the consent's performed using the correct version, right? The subject should not be enrolled until informed consent is completed accurately and consent performed by an appropriate personnel as well, because Clark is not authorized to do that. So preventative action, investigate the reason the incorrect version of the informed consent was used, right? Why did that happen? Well, Debbie just shot the gun and printed out 100 of these at the beginning, or it wasn't uploaded in the right application that we're using. You know, what do we need to correct on our side? Once again, ensuring the appropriate training for good documentation practices are given, because once again, there was areas that were left blank that were not completed. All right, so let's talk about eligibility. And I think somebody, sorry, the name is escaping me now, told us that subject number 2 is not eligible because they have to be, they're 17 years old. All right, so what else did you find with eligibility? Anything else?
Subject 1, the pre-existing diagnosis of arachnophobia. The question is, when was that identified? And I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I don't think it's, it does, we don't have a date there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just used my turquoise pen on my handout. Okay. Anything else? Good. Kim, that was actually, that was a new one that we didn't have written. So thank you. But once again, when you do case studies, right? So we found that one already. Anybody else find something else? This is why, oh, go ahead, Michelle, sorry.
So in general, I have a problem with the eligibility checklist because they checked the inclusion criteria and X'd the exclusion criteria without saying, you know, any note or anything, which one is saying, yes, they're eligible. So you could technically not tell if the patient's excluded or included. in the
Okay.
study.
Yeah, good. Okay. I'm gonna let Annie write that down. Go ahead, Shelley. What do you got for me?
Lois Lane was already inundated, so how can she do consent?
What was it again? Sorry.
Lois Lane has already been inundated on the DOA, so how is she doing consent?
Correct. Absolutely. Thank you, Shelley. Appreciate that. Yep. And she also did not do is she the one? Yeah, Lois Lane, right? She didn't complete training. Her training's not on the DOA. Or she's on the DOA, but she didn't do training. Yep. Yep. Perfect. Okay. The eligibility checklist does not match the excerpt that we gave you from the actual protocol. Item number 3 for inclusion criteria is actually not listed on that eligibility checklist, right? Maybe an amendment happened. So once again, very important if an amendment does occur for you to make sure that you do have, that you also update your eligibility checklist as well. Right. And I don't like the eligibility checklist. There's no version. How do I know which version I have of it? Sorry. I know Sarah, I'm sure Sarah's laughing on the other side because I'm all about version. Corrective actions for the things we've talked about. Great job, guys. Thank you so much. And thank you for willing to be speaking on this. I appreciate it. The subject can't be included, right? They're not the right age. They should not, this eligibility checklist was not filled out correctly. Update the checklist to re-verify and re-document eligibility prior to enrolling. Preventative action for this is retraining of personnel. with the eligibility assessment may be required. Once again, what Michelle pointed out, you know, these are actually should be checked and not X'd, or however you're going to determine that. Verify mechanism by which a protocol update was performed and corresponding forms were not promptly changed as well. Some other issues that you may have found, you just maybe not verbalized them. The informed consent form section, voluntary participation, requires updating. So making sure you have, and that's for our institution here. Our IRB updated it, but is not updated here in our examples. There was a person added to the study at a later date. And once again, Regina Wow has not been trained on the protocol. So making sure that those two documents match. Site training record version date is incorrect. It has 2018 when everybody signed off on 2017 that they did the training. So once again, very important to make sure that what's at the top is also correct as well. Is a more recently IRB approved informed consent form or protocol available? This couldn't be verified by the information given because once again, it's just a case study. Always verify correct version of document used for QC. Okay. So we're going to do exercise B a little different because I know I'm at the very top of the hour. So I'm actually going to share this with you. Is that big enough on your guys? Let me get out of here too. Can I get out of here? Yeah. Okay, is that big enough for you guys on your side? Yeah, no, yes. Okay. So this is my case report form. Off the top of the head, what do you see?
No units for height.
Thank you, Erica. And I laugh because Erica's been on several of my trainings and I don't know why that's a good example.
Sticky note.
Sticky note, right? How hard is it to keep track? Well, first of all, you shouldn't use that sticky note. And then how hard is it to keep track of that sticky note, right? And they, you know, and they didn't write it in up there, which, okay, that makes sense. But, okay. Who completed this form? Because you're seeing the whole form. I don't know. There's no signature. There's no date, right? Now, come on. Is someone not going to say something about this? Because this drove me crazy this morning just looking at it, right? Once again, everything, you have to be able to see that. It's okay, you made a mistake. One line through initial date. If I was also, maybe this is maybe a naive sponsor, an investigator that's coming to me and he said, oh, I created this great case report form for you, Debbie. I might say, you know, there's a better way to write the weight, the height, you know, putting boxes to put the information in, things like that. So that's me being, well, picky, but I am type A, so. All right. Well, thank you guys, everybody. Just in conclusion, once again, quality is everybody's job. So making sure that everybody's doing that. Sorry, like I said, I just ran through that instead of having you do it. We want to protect our humans. We also want to have that reliability of our trial results as well. So thank you guys, everyone, for attending today. We will be sending the slides out and the sign-in sheet probably next week just because we need to get a couple things done on our side. So thank you so much. I appreciate you attending today. If you have any questions for myself or Annie, please let us know.